Okay, so this next one is on three presidents, Presidents Nixon, Carter, and Reagan, and I will do a short description of the three. Okay, so the first is Richard Nixon. The dates for him are he was president from 1969 to 1974, and it shows here that Nixon won this election um, and became president in '69. And there something about Nixon. He was president at the time the Vietnam War ended. Also, during his presidency, a very important constitutional amendment occurred, which, was, as you know, is a change in the Constitution, which is very difficult to get through Congress and through the states. But this is the 26th Amendment, which you should know, and is the rights of citizens who are 18 years of age or older, got the right to vote. So the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. And I mean, Nixon did not create this, but this happened during his presidency. And and this really the reasoning for this was that if soldiers and men could fight, then they should be able to vote. So really, this was a direct result of the Vietnam War. So another highly publicized event that occurred was when Nixon visited Red China, which Red China was Communist China. He visited China in 1972. And this was the first U.S. president to visit that country since it had become communist. So it was very controversial. Some Americans thought it was a great step towards peace, and others thought that Nixon shouldn't visit a dictator in a totalitarian state. But either way, it received tremendous coverage, the whole summit and visit, and it's certainly a famous event that occurred when he was president. So Nixon was very popular. He won his re-election in a landslide, but what really drove him out of office was something called the Watergate scandal, which is mentioned in this text and all history texts at the time. Well, with the Watergate burglary, which was when the Republican Party, certain members of it, recorded a private conversation of the Democrat meeting in the Watergate Hotel, and that really gives a clear, short explanation of it because it's a complicated explanation. But this is the bottom line of it, is that there was a secret recording made by these so-called Watergate burglars, and that was obviously one party is not supposed to be recording another private conversation, and so he was blamed for that, and it really brought down his presidency because there was no proof that he was actually knowledgeable of it happening, but it did show evidence over a long year trial, televised trial, that he may have participated in the cover-up, and many of his recordings of his telephone calls, he was quite crude in speaking, so he became very embarrassed over that. That was released to the public, and it was just a huge thing that drove him to resign, of the first president to resign. Also going on in this same era in 1975, Generalissimo Franco of Spain dies. I've mentioned him earlier in the class in reference to World War II. Uh, so, in spite of the fact that he was a dictator and had been criticized for human rights abuses, he did help Spain in World War II by remaining neutral, and he did not cooperate with Hitler in the Holocaust. So that's something to his credit. And also, I actually happened to be in Spain the day he died, and I had no idea that he had died. And my mother was there too, and This is back in '75, and we walked by the royal palace that he was the ruler from, not knowing that he died, and there were like uh, police with machine guns looking at us like we were crazy because it was martial law, but we didn't know about that. But I happened to be there at the time, and we had been there to visit the amazingly gorgeous Barcelona, which I would recommend uh, as a trip. But this was in Madrid then, where this happened, and he died, and that was the end of his rule of Spain. And after he died, he was replaced by King Juan Carlos I, and then Juan Carlos encouraged the country to become a democracy. And there you see Juan Carlos again, and he abdicated the throne, but he helped greatly with the transition of Spain at the time. But this occurred right after Nixon had been president. It just occurs at the same time, actually, when the Vice President Ford was president. So the next president in '77, we've now covered Nixon, and the next president is Carter, and he was president from 1977 to 1981, so for 4 years. And it shows his election in '76. Pretty close election, but he won. Pretty close in the amount of states. But what really brought him down was the problems in the Middle East. So there was a revolution in the Middle East, and coups occurred, and the takeover and the overthrow of some monarchies in the Middle East. And in Iran, there was a military revolution, and the United States, which had some involvement in the Middle East, in Iran, was now being driven out of Iran by the revolutionaries. But then it turned quite into a spectacle when 52 American hostages were taken by the Iranian military and revolutionaries, and paraded around in plain sight on the news, shown every night for over a year. And for 444 days this went on, which really destroyed Jimmy Carter's presidency. Another thing where he was losing popularity, people said he was powerless in foreign policy, but now gasoline, because of Middle Eastern countries raising oil prices, gasoline doubled under Carter, which just created a chain reaction of gas shortages and rising prices. And so Carter was well liked as a very honest type president, but because of inflation and the hostage crisis, he left office. He was defeated in his next election, in his reelection. So the next president who defeated Carter was Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 to 1989. So for 2 terms, a Reagan landslide. And you can see here, I mean, it's all red. So Reagan, as a Republican, won in a great landslide. And much of that was because he was a good speaker, but also because Carter had all these problems. So you see Reagan here, who had run under a campaign of promising national security. And it says in this headline, minutes after he became president, the hostages were released by the Iranians, which, for 2 reasons they were released. One, they were feeling powerful because they felt like they drove Carter out of office through the hostage crisis. And also they were concerned that Reagan was a strong military supporter, and they were concerned with what he might do and he was unpredictable. Um, so the Iranians let the hostages go, which was Reagan's first foreign policy victory. And it shows here in his reelection, he won by a gigantic landslide. As, because the economy improved, inflation lowered, and because of his strong national security. Okay. So Reaganomics is to do with tax cuts, which some give credit to a lowering of uh, unemployment and stabilizing the economy. The number one criticism of Reagan was uh, his his dealings with unions, labor unions in general. He was not a friend of labor unions, and so labor unions were became opposed to him. And this was the biggest strike that worked out badly for Reagan, the air traffic controllers strike. And this is when he fired the air traffic controllers when they went on strike for higher wages. So rather than a strike, he used his government power to release the air traffic controllers, which caused chaos with having to hire new air traffic controllers and chaos with flights. But that's what Reagan did, and that was certainly one of his most unpopular moves, as well as other labor unions and farm worker unions had problems with Reagan. So that was his biggest criticism. Another military thing that happened under Reagan that's in your textbook was the invasion of Grenada, which was really a short invasion that Ronald Reagan approved of Marines invading an island called Grenada, which was in the middle of a revolution and a coup, and the American medical students were in danger of being taken hostage. So Reagan, within hours, sent in the troops to remove the U.S. Students and to oppose the revolution, but he did withdraw very quickly. So yeah, that's again a map of Grenada, which is in the textbook, in a map in the textbook. Okay, so we've covered Reagan. Yeah, we've covered Reagan, Nixon, and Carter.